The certified letter hit my breakfast table at exactly 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mitchell Carlson?" he asked, and when I nodded, he thrust the envelope at me and practically sprinted back to his car. I should have known right then that my peaceful life on Sunset Ridge Ranch was about to explode. The letter, printed on official HOA letterhead with more gold embossing than a wedding invitation, informed me that the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association was initiating immediate proceedings to reclaim my property under Clause 17.4 of their expanded jurisdiction bylaws. The reason? My 10-acre ranch was desperately needed for the HOA president's brother's mental health recovery facility, and apparently, I was standing in the way of his healing journey. I nearly choked on my coffee. I'd owned this ranch for 12 years. Bought it with my savings from 2 decades of working oil rigs in Alaska, and not once had anyone mentioned anything about HOA jurisdiction. The property deed was clear as day. This land was mine, free and clear. No liens, no easements, no HOA nonsense. But here was Margaret Fitzgerald, HOA Présidente Extraordinaire, informing me through legal channels that my ranch fell under something called retroactive community integration, and that her brother, recently returned from a traumatic business failure in Singapore, needed my exact property for his therapeutic llama sanctuary. The doorbell rang again 20 minutes later. This time it was Margaret herself, standing on my porch in a power suit that probably cost more than my truck, flanked by 2 men in matching HOA security polo shirts. She didn't wait for an invitation. "Mr. Carlson, I trust you received our notice. We need to discuss your transition timeline." She pushed past me into my living room like she owned the place, which apparently she thought she did. "The therapeutic llama program starts in 6 weeks, and will need you completely relocated by then." I stood there in my bathrobe, coffee mug still in hand, trying to process the sheer audacity. "Margaret, this is my property. I'm not part of your HOA. Never have been. Never will be." She pulled out an iPad and swiped through documents with manicured nails that clicked against the screen. "Actually, according to our expanded boundary assessment completed last month, your property falls within the Greater Sunset Ridge Community Impact Zone. Section 42 clearly states that any property deemed essential for community wellness initiatives can be requisitioned through proper channels. You can't just make up rules and apply them to property you don't own," I said, my voice steady, despite the anger building in my chest. Margaret smiled, the kind of smile that made you want to check your wallet. "We don't make up rules, Mr. Carlson. We interpret community needs, and right now, this community needs a therapeutic llama sanctuary more than it needs another isolated rancher playing cowboy." I'd been recording the entire conversation on my phone, which sat innocuously on the coffee table between us. 3 years of dealing with boundary disputes and easement issues had taught me to document everything. "And what makes you think your brother's llama therapy is more important than my home?" I asked, watching her face carefully. Her expression shifted, just for a moment, revealing something darker underneath the polished exterior. "My brother Timothy has suffered tremendously. His import-export business collapsed. His marriage ended, and he's been diagnosed with severe environmental sensitivity disorder. The only thing that brings him peace is the presence of llamas. Your ranch, with its elevation and southeastern exposure, is the only suitable location within 50 miles for his recovery." "Environmental sensitivity disorder," I repeated slowly. "And llamas are the cure?" Margaret's security guards shifted uncomfortably. Even they seemed to recognize the absurdity. "It's a recognized condition," she snapped. "Our HOA Wellness Committee has thoroughly researched the therapeutic benefits of llama interaction for individuals with Timothy's specific constellation of symptoms." I set down my coffee mug and leaned back in my grandfather's old leather chair. "Margaret, I'm going to say this once. This is my home. I've raised horses here, built my workshop here, scattered my father's ashes under that oak tree. You can see through the window. I'm not leaving for you, your brother, or a whole army of therapeutic llamas." Her face flushed red, clashing with her coral lipstick. Then you're forcing us to take more aggressive action. The HOA has significant resources at its disposal. Mr. Carlson, we've successfully relocated 17 homeowners who initially resisted community improvement initiatives. You won't be any different. That's when I knew this wasn't just about one crazy HOA president and her troubled brother. This was a pattern, a system, maybe even a conspiracy. Seventeen homeowners. How many of those relocations were actually legal? I kept my expression neutral, but inside, investigative instincts from my younger years as a journalist started firing. 17 families. You say? That's quite a track record. Margaret stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt. My brother will be visiting the property tomorrow at 2 p.m. to assess the facilities. I suggest you prepare for the transition. Carl. Dennis. We're leaving. Her security guards followed her out, but not before one of them, Dennis, I think, gave me a look that seemed almost apologetic. The moment they left, I sprang into action. First, I backed up the recording to 3 different cloud services and emailed it to my attorney friend, Robert Chen, with the subject line, Houston. We have a problem. Then I started making calls. The county recorder's office confirmed what I already knew. My property had never been part of any HOA. The clerk, a helpful woman named Janice, even laughed when I mentioned Margaret's expanded boundary assessment. She said, Mr. Carlson, that woman tries to expand her boundaries every 6 months. Last year she tried to claim the national forest land bordered her jurisdiction. My next call was to the other homeowners in the area. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Tom Harrison, who'd owned a 5-acre plot near mine, had been forced out 6 months ago after the HOA filed numerous false complaints about his property. Sarah Mills, an elderly widow, had been harassed with daily fines until she sold her home for half its value. The pattern was clear. Margaret Fitzgerald was systematically forcing out property owners to expand her HOA's control, and now she'd set her sights on my ranch. That night, I installed motion sensor cameras around the property, hidden in tree hollows and fence posts. If Margaret or her brother showed up for their assessment, I'd have everything recorded. I also did something I hadn't done in years. I reached out to my old journalism contacts. If Margaret wanted to play hardball, she was about to discover that I had a few tricks of my own. The next morning started with another surprise. When I walked out to feed the horses, I found bright orange HOA violation notices plastered all over my fence. Grass height exceeds community standards. Unauthorized livestock. Structure color non-compliant with approved pallet. Each notice came with a fine. The total? $23,500. Due within 72 hours. I was photographing the notices when my neighbor, Bill Patterson, pulled up in his truck. Mitch, you see what that woman's doing now? He held up his own collection of orange papers. Got hit with 15 grand in fines this morning. Says my solar panels are creating unauthorized glare. She's trying to force us out. I said, showing him the letter about the llama sanctuary. Bill read it and shook his head. Timothy Fitzgerald. I remember him from the country club. Got caught embezzling from his own company. Fled to Singapore until the statute of limitations ran out. Now he's back playing the victim. This was getting more interesting by the minute. Embezzling, you say? Bill nodded. My brother-in-law worked for the prosecutor's office. Said they had him dead to rights. But suddenly witnesses started retracting statements. Evidence went missing. Margaret's husband at the time was a judge. Do the math. I spent the rest of the morning researching Timothy Fitzgerald. What I found painted a picture of a serial con artist who'd left a trail of failed businesses and lawsuits across 3 states. The llama therapy angle was just his latest grift, and his sister was willing to steal my home to enable it. At exactly 2 p.m., a convoy of vehicles arrived at my gate. Margaret's white Escalade led the pack, followed by a van with Healing Hooves Llama Therapy painted on the side, and 2 more cars full of what looked like HOA board members. I stood at the gate, which remained firmly locked, and waited. Margaret emerged wearing a hard hat and carrying a clipboard, as if she was conducting an official inspection. Mr. Carlson, open the gate. We're here for the scheduled assessment. I smiled pleasantly. I don't recall scheduling anything, and since this is private property, you'll need to stay on that side of the fence. Timothy Fitzgerald climbed out of the van, and I had to suppress a laugh. He was wearing what looked like surgical scrubs, rubber boots, and a face mask, as if my ranch was contaminated. Margaret, I can already feel the positive energy from here. This is perfect for the llamas. The southeastern exposure is exactly what Dr. Krishnamurthy recommended. Glad you like the view? I called out. Feel free to buy the empty lot 5 miles down the road. I hear it has great southwestern exposure. Timothy's face twisted. You don't understand? I need this specific land. The ley lines converge here. It's the only place within the bioregion where the llama's chakras will align properly. One of the board members, a nervous-looking man in his 60s, stepped forward. Perhaps we could discuss a fair market offer. Mr. Carlson? I recognized him as Harold Weinstein, who'd been on the HOA board for 20 years. Unlike Margaret, he seemed uncomfortable with the situation. Harold, this land isn't for sale at any price. And even if it was, I wouldn't sell it to people who paper my fence with fake violations. I held up the stack of orange notices. Margaret's smile turned predatory. Those violations are quite real. Mr. Carlson, failure to pay the fines will result in a lien being placed on your property. You can't place a lien on property that isn't under your jurisdiction, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. And according to the county recorder's office, which I called yesterday, this property has never been part of any HOA. Jurisdictions can be fluid. Margaret replied smoothly. Our legal team has identified several precedents for expanding community oversight to protect area, property values, and resident welfare. I pulled out my phone and pretended to check something. In reality, I was making sure it was still recording. Margaret, are you saying that you intend to fraudulently claim authority over properties that aren't legally part of your HOA? She stiffened. I'm saying that community needs sometimes transcend outdated property lines. Now, are you going to open this gate? Or do we need to involve law enforcement? That's when I played my first card. Actually, I've already involved law enforcement. Sheriff Martinez is very interested in your pattern of forcing out homeowners, especially since 3 of them filed complaints about harassment and fraudulent liens before they mysteriously decided to sell. The color drained from Margaret's face. Behind her, Harold Weinstein took a step back, and I saw him pull out his phone. Timothy, oblivious to the mounting tension, had wandered over to the fence and was making cooing noises at my horses. These aren't llamas, he announced, as if making a profound discovery. Llamas have much better auras. Tim, get back in the van. Margaret hissed, but Timothy was on a roll. You know, sis, once we get this place, we can flip it in 6 months for triple what these suckers sold for. Just like the Harrison property and the Mills place. The entire group went silent. Harold Weinstein's phone was definitely recording now, and 2 other board members were backing away from Margaret like she was radioactive. I smiled sweetly. Did your brother just admit to property flipping? I thought this was about his desperate need for llama therapy. Margaret grabbed Timothy's arm. He's not well. He doesn't know what he's saying. But Timothy yanked away from her. I know exactly what I'm saying. You promised me this ranch. Marge, you said it would be easy. Just like the others. A few fines. Some legal threats. Maybe have Carl and Dennis pay him a midnight visit. I looked at the 2 security guards, Carl and Dennis. They were studying their shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. Midnight visit? I asked loudly. Are you talking about criminal trespassing? Intimidation? Because that sounds like conspiracy to commit multiple felonies. Margaret's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely. You think you're so smart? Don't you? Sitting out here on your ranch? Pretending to be some noble cowboy. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I own half the judges in this county. My husband's law firm has crushed bigger fish than you. Actually, a new voice called out. That would be your ex-husband's law firm? And they dropped you as a client 6 months ago. Everyone turned to see a woman in a sharp business suit walking up the drive, followed by 2 men in FBI windbreakers. My phone call to Robert Chen had set off a chain reaction. It turned out the FBI had been investigating Margaret's HOA for racketeering and wire fraud for over a year. 3 displaced homeowners had filed federal complaints, and my recorded conversation from yesterday had given them probable cause to move. The woman in the suit extended her hand to me through the gate. Agent Sarah Delacroix, FBI White Collar Crime Division. Mr. Carlson, we appreciate your cooperation. She turned to Margaret, whose face had gone from red to ashen. Mrs. Fitzgerald, we have a warrant to search your home, your office, and all HOA financial records. I suggest you contact an attorney. Timothy tried to run back to the van, but his rubber boots slipped on the gravel and he face-planted spectacularly. One of the FBI agents helped him up and guided him to their vehicle. I want immunity, he shouted. I'll tell you everything. The judge bribes. The forged documents. Where she hides the money. Shut up. You idiot, Margaret screamed, lunging at her brother. Carl and Dennis had to physically restrain her, and I noticed they seemed almost relieved to be doing so. Harold Weinstein stepped forward, his face grave. Agent Delacroix. As a board member, I've had concerns about our president's actions for some time. I have documents that might be helpful to your investigation. The FBI agent nodded appreciatively. We'll need statements from all board members. Those who cooperate fully will be looked upon favorably. Within minutes, the HOA board members were falling over themselves to distance themselves from Margaret. Stories came pouring out about forged signatures, phantom violations, and a secret fund where Margaret deposited the money from forced property sales. As they loaded Margaret into the FBI vehicle, she locked eyes with me one last time. This isn't over. Carlson, I have friends. Powerful friends. I walked up to the gate, close enough that she could hear me clearly. You know what you don't have? Margaret? My ranch? And you never will. The convoy of law enforcement vehicles was pulling away when my phone rang. It was Robert Chen, my attorney friend. Mitch, you're not going to believe this. I just got a call from the state attorney general's office. Apparently, your HOA president has been running similar schemes in 3 other counties. They want to interview you as a key witness. I stood there at my gate, watching the dust settle from all the vehicles, feeling the afternoon sun warm on my face. The horses had gone back to grazing, completely unbothered by all the drama. But something told me this was far from over. Margaret Fitzgerald had threatened that she had powerful friends, and people like her didn't go down without a fight. As I walked back to the house, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Fresh tire tracks leading from the back of my property through a section of fence I rarely checked. Someone had been on my land while I was distracted at the front gate. I followed the tracks to my workshop, and my heart sank. The door was slightly open, the lock cut clean through. Inside, my safe had been pried open, and all my important documents were gone. Property deed, insurance papers, the original survey maps, everything. I was reaching for my phone to call the sheriff when I heard it. The distinctive sound of a helicopter approaching fast and low, not a police helicopter, but a sleek private model that circled my ranch once before, hovering directly over my house. A rope dropped from the side door, and I watched in disbelief as someone in tactical gear began descending. That's when I realized Margaret Fitzgerald wasn't just some power-hungry HOA president. She was part of something much bigger, much more dangerous. And I was standing right in the middle of it, on a ranch that apparently meant more to these people than I could have ever imagined. As the figure in tactical gear hit the ground and started moving toward my house with military precision, I made a decision that would change everything. I reached for the emergency beacon I'd installed years ago, a relic from my journalism days in war zones, and pressed the button 3 times. If Margaret had powerful friends, it was time to see if I still had a few of my own. The emergency beacon signal would reach my old handler at the State Department in exactly 90 seconds, but the tactical operator was already halfway to my porch. I ducked back inside, grabbed the shotgun from above the fireplace, and tried to remember the evasion techniques from my war correspondent days in Beirut. 20 years of peaceful ranch life had made me soft. But muscle memory kicked in as I heard boots on my porch. Mitchell Carlson. A muffled voice called through the door. We need to talk. I'm not here to hurt you. The accent was slight but distinct. South African. Maybe Rhodesian. I kept the shotgun trained on the door. Funny way of showing it. Rappelling onto my property from an unmarked helicopter. My employer insists on dramatic entrances. The voice replied with what sounded like genuine annoyance. I'm going to slide my identification under the door. Please don't shoot it. A laminated card slipped under the doorframe. Private military contractor license. The kind used by corporate security firms that operated in legal gray zones. The name read Derek van der Merwe. Greystone Security Solutions. Never heard of you. I called out. Though the name Greystone tickled something in my memory, what does Margaret Fitzgerald's private army want with me? Van der Merwe actually laughed. Private army? Miss Fitzgerald couldn't afford my daily rate. I work for someone with much deeper pockets and much more serious interests. Someone who's very curious about what's buried under your ranch. My blood ran cold. Buried under my ranch? I thought about the old surveys. The property deed going back to 1892. My great-grandfather's cryptic notes about mineral rights. There's nothing under my ranch but dirt and rock. I said, buying time while I texted my location to 3 different contacts. Mr. Carlson, your great-grandfather filed mining claims on this property in 1923. He found something, didn't he? Something valuable enough that he spent the rest of his life fighting off corporate interests. Something valuable enough that Margaret Fitzgerald was willing to commit federal crimes to acquire this land. The helicopter was still hovering overhead, its rotor wash shaking my windows. I heard vehicles approaching fast on the main road. Either my distress signal had worked, or van der Merwe had backup coming. Even if that was true, and I'm not saying it is, this is still my land. Whatever's underneath it is mine too. Legally, yes. Van der Merwe agreed, but my employer prefers to acquire things through negotiation rather than litigation. May I come in? Despite appearances, I really am here to talk. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Throw your weapons off the porch. All of them. I heard metallic clattering as what sounded like a small arsenal hit my deck. A pistol, combat knife, and what looked like flashbang grenades. I'm keeping the zip ties. He called out. Man's gotta have some dignity. I cracked the door open. Shotgun still ready. Van der Merwe was exactly what I'd expected. 6'4", built like a linebacker, with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much, but his hands were raised, and his expression was more tired than threatening. 5 minutes, I said, stepping back to let him in. He looked around my living room with professional interest, noting exits and cover positions. Nice place. Defensible. Your great-grandfather knew what he was doing when he built here. He settled into a chair, moving carefully to show he wasn't a threat. My employer is willing to pay $50 million for your ranch. Cash. No questions asked. You could buy 10 ranches with that money. Your employer can go to hell. I said flatly. This isn't about money. Van der Merwe nodded like he'd expected that answer. What if I told you that Margaret Fitzgerald wasn't working alone? That she's part of a network that's been systematically acquiring properties across the western United States? Properties that all share one common feature? Before I could ask what feature, the sound of vehicles roaring up my driveway interrupted us. Through the window, I saw 2 black SUVs and a sheriff's cruiser. But something was wrong. Sheriff Martinez hadn't sent backup. These vehicles moved with the coordination of a professional team. Van der Merwe, that would be the competition. I suggest we move this conversation to your basement. Now. The front door exploded inward before I could respond. 4 men in tactical gear stormed in, weapons raised. But these weren't law enforcement. Their gear was too new, too expensive. And they moved like private military. Van der Merwe dove behind the couch as I brought the shotgun up. But I was outnumbered and outgunned. Drop it. Carlson, the lead operator ordered. His accent was American, but clipped and precise. Corporate security. I recognized the type from my time covering international conflicts. These were the men corporations hired when legal channels failed. I lowered the shotgun slowly. Mind racing. Let me guess. Fitzgerald's powerful friends? The operator smiled coldly. Miss Fitzgerald was a useful idiot. She thought she was building a real estate empire. She had no idea what she was really helping us acquire. He gestured to one of his men. Basement. Check for the surveys. That's when Van der Merwe made his move. The flashbang he'd kept hidden detonated with a blinding light and deafening sound. In the chaos, I heard gunfire, shouting, and the crash of furniture. My military training kicked in and I rolled behind the kitchen counter, clutching the shotgun. Carlson. The beacon, Van der Merwe shouted over the noise. Did you activate it? Before I could answer, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. Not the sleek corporate bird from earlier, but the heavy thump of military Blackhawks, multiple Blackhawks. The cavalry had arrived, but I had no idea whose cavalry it was. The windows shattered as smoke grenades sailed through. The room filled with dense gray fog. I heard boots on the porch. Different from the corporate security team, these moved with military precision. Federal agents? Everyone on the ground now? The voice was familiar. Sarah Delacroix. The FBI agent from this morning, but what was she doing here with military backup? Through the smoke, I saw Van der Merwe engaged in hand-to-hand combat with two operators. Despite being outnumbered, the South African was holding his own. The lead corporate operator was shouting into his radio, calling for extraction. Then I heard something that made everything click into place. The lithium deposits, he yelled. Confirm the lithium deposits before we exfil. Lithium, the miracle mineral that powered every electric car, every smartphone, every piece of modern technology, and, apparently, my great-grandfather had found a massive deposit of it under our ranch, a century before anyone knew how valuable it would become. That's why Margaret had been so desperate, why these corporate mercenaries were willing to stage an armed assault, why someone was willing to pay $50 million for land worth maybe $2 million on the open market. Agent Delacroix's team swept through the house with brutal efficiency. The corporate operators were overwhelmed in seconds, zip-tied and lined up on my living room floor. Van der Merwe, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, raised his hands in surrender. Private contractor? He announced calmly. I have identification. I'm here on behalf of Lithium International Limited. We know who you are. Van der Merwe, Delacroix said, her weapon still trained on him. We've been tracking your employer's attempts to acquire strategic mineral deposits for months. She looked at me, and her expression softened slightly. Mr. Carlson, are you injured? I stood up slowly, ears still ringing from the flashbang. I'm fine, but what the hell is going on? This morning you were arresting my HOA president for fraud. Now you're running military operations on my ranch? Delacroix holstered her weapon and pulled out a badge I didn't recognize. I wasn't entirely honest this morning. FBI was just our entry point. I'm actually with the Strategic Minerals Security Division, a joint task force between multiple agencies. We've been investigating attempts by foreign corporations to secretly acquire critical mineral deposits across the United States. She gestured to the captured operators. These men work for Celestial Mining Syndicate, a shell company owned by foreign nationals who've been using people like Margaret Fitzgerald to force property owners off land containing strategic minerals. Your ranch sits on one of the largest untapped lithium deposits in North America. My head was spinning. So Margaret's whole HOA scheme, Delacroix nodded, was funded and directed by Celestial. They identified properties with mineral deposits, then used local proxies like Fitzgerald to acquire them through harassment, fraud, and intimidation. She probably didn't even know what she was really doing. They told her she'd get a cut of the property, flipping profits. Not knowing the real value was underground, Van der Merwe cleared his throat. For what it's worth, my employer is a legitimate South African mining concern. We wanted to make a fair offer before Celestial could steal the property. He looked at me with something like respect. Your great-grandfather was brilliant. He filed mining claims but never developed them. Knowing someday they'd be worth a fortune, he protected this land for you. I thought about all the times my grandfather had told me to never sell the ranch. No matter what. How my father had turned down offers from developers and mining companies. They all knew they were protecting our legacy until the time was right. So what happens now? I asked. Looking at the destruction in my living room, I just want to raise horses and live in peace. Delacroix smiled. That's the beautiful thing about strategic mineral deposits on private land. The government can't force you to develop them. But we can make sure no one else forces you either. Your ranch is about to become a matter of national security. Mr. Carlson, that comes with federal protection. She pulled out a document. This is a preliminary agreement. You maintain full ownership and control of your land. In exchange for allowing periodic geological surveys and having first refusal rights, if you ever decide to develop the minerals, the government will ensure no one, foreign or domestic, can force you off this property. And Margaret? I asked. Her brother? Timothy Fitzgerald is already negotiating a plea deal. Delacroix said. He's providing evidence about Celestial's entire network. Margaret is looking at 25 to life for racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy. The 17 families she forced out will have their cases reviewed, and most will likely receive significant compensation from seized assets. The lead corporate operator suddenly spoke up from his position on the floor. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Celestial has resources you can't imagine. This won't end here. Delacroix knelpte him. You're right. It won't end here. It ends with your CEO's extradition from Switzerland and the complete dismantling of your operation. She stood and addressed her team. Process them all. I want full interrogations and asset seizures by morning. As the operators were led out, Van der Merwe looked at me. That offer from my employer stands. Mr. Carlson, 50 million. And you keep the house and 5 acres. Think about it. I shook my head. This land isn't for sale. Not for 50 million. Not for 500 million. My great-grandfather protected it. My grandfather protected it. My father protected it. Now it's my turn. He nodded slowly. I respect that. Not many would turn down that kind of money. As the FBI led him out, he called back. Watch yourself. Carlson. Celestial has a long memory and deep pockets. This might be over. But they won't forget. The sun was setting by the time the last vehicle left my property. Agent Delacroix had stationed a protection detail at my gate, and technicians were installing sophisticated security systems around the ranch. I stood on my porch, surveying the damage. When Harold Weinstein's car pulled up, the former HOA board member looked haggard but relieved. Mr. Carlson, I wanted to apologize. We had no idea what Margaret was really doing. The FBI showed us evidence. The families she destroyed, the money she stole. We were complicit through our ignorance. I appreciated his honesty. What will happen to the HOA? Harold almost smiled. What OA? The board voted to dissolve it this afternoon. Turns out, when you remove all the illegally annexed properties, there's not enough houses left to maintain an association. We're just a regular neighborhood now. He handed me an envelope. The real board members wanted you to have this. It's a certified document confirming your property was never part of our jurisdiction. Along with our formal apology. After Harold left, I walked to the barn to check on the horses. They'd weathered the chaos with typical equine indifference. As I filled their water troughs, my phone rang. Unknown number. But I answered anyway. Mr. Carlson? The voice was old. Refined. With a slight Germanic accent. My name is Heinrich Richter. I'm the chairman of Celestial Mining Syndicate. I believe we've had a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I laughed bitterly. You sent armed mercenaries to my home? You corrupted local officials? You destroyed 17 families. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a crime syndicate. There was a pause. Perhaps. But consider this. Governments change. Protection details end. Court orders expire. But mineral deposits? Those are forever. As is my organization's interest in them. We can be patient. Mr. Carlson, we've waited 100 years. We can wait 100 more. Then you'll be waiting a long time, I said, because this ranch will pass to my children. And their children. And every one of them will know exactly what's under this ground and who wants to steal it. Richter chuckled. A sound like ice cracking. We shall see. Mr. Carlson, we shall see. Enjoy your victory. But remember, every fortress eventually falls. Every guardian eventually sleeps. And we'll be watching. The line went dead. I stood there in the gathering darkness, looking out over my land. Somewhere beneath my feet, lay enough lithium to power millions of electric vehicles, worth billions of dollars. But its real value wasn't monetary. It was a test of character, passed down through generations. My great-grandfather had found treasure and chosen family over fortune. Now it was my turn to make the same choice. 6 months later, life had returned to something resembling normal. The bullet holes in my living room had been patched, the security systems had become part of the landscape, and the federal protection detail had been reduced to periodic check-ins. Margaret Fitzgerald had been sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, while Timothy had gotten 5 years in minimum security in exchange for his testimony. 12 of the 17 displaced families had recovered their properties or received compensation that let them buy new homes. But the best part was the letter I received from the Department of the Interior. My ranch had been designated a National Heritage Site, protecting it from development for the next 99 years, while allowing me to continue ranching operations. The lithium would stay in the ground, a strategic reserve for future generations when America might truly need it. I was sitting on my porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, when a familiar truck pulled up. Bill Patterson climbed out, carrying a 6-pack of beer and wearing a grin. "Heard you turned down another offer yesterday. 100 million this time?" I nodded. 120. "Actually, some tech billionaire who wants to start his own battery company." Bill handed me a beer and settled into the rocking chair beside me. "You know you're crazy, right? That's generational wealth you're turning down." I took a long sip and looked out over the land my family had protected for a century. "This is generational wealth, Bill. Just not the kind you can deposit in a bank." We sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. Somewhere out there, Celestial Mining was probably plotting their next move. Other corporations were analyzing geological surveys, calculating profit margins, scheming to extract wealth from the earth. But tonight, on this ranch, there was only peace. The horses grazed in the pasture, the creek bubbled through the valley, and the land endured as it always had. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Delacroix. "Intelligence suggests Celestial is focusing on properties in Canada now. Thought you'd want to know. Your ranch is safe." I smiled and put the phone away. Safe was a relative term when you were sitting on billions of dollars of critical minerals. But my great-grandfather had been smart enough to see the future, brave enough to protect it, and wise enough to trust his descendants to do the same. As Bill and I watched the full moon rise over the mountains, I thought about Heinrich Richter's words. Every fortress eventually falls. Maybe he was right. Maybe someday, long after I'm gone, someone will find a way to extract the lithium from beneath this land. But not today. Not on my watch. And not without one hell of a fight. The ranch would endure. The family legacy would continue. And somewhere underneath it all, a fortune in lithium would wait for a day when it might serve a better purpose than lining corporate pockets. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said to Bill, as we opened our second beers. "Margaret Fitzgerald wanted this land for a therapeutic llama sanctuary. Imagine if she'd known she was trying to steal one of the largest lithium deposits in North America for a bunch of llamas." Bill nearly choked on his beer laughing. "Those would have been the richest llamas in history." We laughed until our sides hurt. Two friends on a porch in the middle of nowhere, guardians of a secret worth billions, choosing the simple pleasure of a cold beer and good company over all the wealth in the world. And in that moment, I knew my great-grandfather would have been proud. The treasure beneath our feet would wait for future generations to decide its fate. For now, the ranch would remain what it had always been. Home. 3 years after the Celestial incident, I thought the lithium wars were behind us. The ranch had become something of a legend in mineral rights circles, the place where corporate greed met its match in one stubborn rancher. Documentary crews had come and gone. Journalists had written their exposés, and I'd turned down enough money to fund a small country's GDP. Life had settled into a pleasant routine of horse training, fence mending, and the occasional federal security briefing. That's why I wasn't prepared for the certified letter that arrived on a humid Thursday morning in July. The return address made my blood run cold. Fitzgerald Federal Correctional Institution. Inside, written in Margaret's distinctive handwriting, was a single paragraph. "Dear Mr. Carlson, I've had 3 years to think about our conflict. You were right about many things, but wrong about one. The lithium was never the real treasure. Check your great-grandfather's journal. Page 47. Some secrets are worth more than minerals. M. Fitzgerald. I'd gone through my great-grandfather's belongings dozens of times since learning about the lithium. His journal, a leather-bound tome filled with cramped handwriting, had revealed the mining claims but nothing else of significance. Still, something about Margaret's tone made me retrieve it from the safe. Page 47 was a sketch of the ranch's topography. Seemingly innocent, except for a symbol I'd never noticed before. A small triangle with a dot in the center, marked near the old well. That evening, as thunderclouds gathered on the horizon, I took a metal detector and shovel to the old well. It had been sealed for decades, declared unsafe by my father after a partial collapse. The metal detector screamed when I passed it over a spot about 10 feet from the well's edge. 2 hours of digging revealed a metal box, rust-covered but intact, wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were documents that made the lithium discovery pale in comparison. My great-grandfather hadn't just found mineral deposits. He'd discovered something that predated mining claims and property rights. Treaty documents from 1847, signed between the U.S. government and the Northern Cheyenne tribe, designating this exact land as a permanent sacred site, maps showing burial grounds, ceremonial spaces, and most shocking of all, a federal agreement that had been deliberately hidden for over a century. According to these documents, the land my ranch occupied wasn't just privately owned. It was technically sovereign tribal territory that had been illegally sold by corrupt federal agents in the 1890s. My great-grandfather had bought the land in good faith but discovered the truth later. Instead of fighting it or hiding it, he'd made a secret agreement with tribal elders to be a guardian of the land until the tribe was ready to reclaim it. The lithium deposits? They sat directly under the most sacred burial sites. I sat back on my heels, rain starting to fall, processing the implications. Every government agency, every corporation, everyone who'd fought over the lithium had missed the real story. This land was never mine to sell or develop. I was just the latest in a line of protectors, keeping it safe until its rightful owners returned. Margaret had discovered this in prison, probably through legal research for her appeals. But why tell me? The answer came the next morning when a small convoy arrived at my gate. Not corporate mercenaries or federal agents, but a delegation from the Northern Cheyenne Nation, their lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Cloud Dancing, presented credentials and a carefully neutral expression. Mr. Carlson, we understand you've made a discovery regarding the historical status of this land. I invited them in, served coffee, and showed them the documents. Patricia examined each page with the reverence they deserved. We've known about these treaties for generations, she said quietly. Oral history preserved what paper trails tried to erase. Your great-grandfather was a friend to our people. He understood that some things matter more than legal ownership. So what happens now? I asked. You have every right to reclaim this land. The documents are clear. Patricia smiled. You're assuming we want to reclaim it in the way you're thinking. Your family has honored my ancestors' trust for over a century. The lithium remains untouched, the sacred sites undisturbed. Why would we change what's working? As I write this, the partnership with the Northern Cheyenne Nation has been formalized. The ranch continues to operate, but now with a deeper purpose. Young tribal members come to learn traditional practices on land their ancestors once walked. The horses graze over billions in lithium that will never see daylight, and every full moon, ceremonial fires burn where they've burned for centuries, just with a gap of about 100 years. Margaret Fitzgerald died in prison last month. Heart attack. The report said. Her lawyer sent me a final note she'd written. The land remembers. Mr. Carlson, thank you for helping it remember correctly. I've thought about those words often. Sometimes the greatest treasure isn't what's under the ground, but the trust placed in those who stand on it. My great-grandfather understood that. Now, finally, so do I. The ranch endures. The lithium sleeps. The truth protects better than any weapon. And somewhere in the federal archives, A treaty from 1847 ensures that this land will remain what it always was, sacred ground. Held in trust. Waiting for nothing more than the next sunrise over the mountains. The greatest fortune, I've learned, is being worthy of that trust. Everything else, as they say, is just dirt and rocks.